Last week, the Mexican people ended 68 years of single-party rule. The vote has been called a revolution in Mexican politics. Many believe it will usher in a new era of democratic reform. Enrique Krauze is a prominent Mexican historian and co-editor of one of the country's leading intellectual journals. His latest book is Mexico, Biography of Power. It traces the making of modern Mexico through the lives of the country's most important leaders. I am pleased to have him on this broadcast to talk a little bit about history and also to base that history as a stepping stone to look to the future. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
1810 was the year of the
start of the Revolution of Independence.
The pre-party founded, what, 1829?
The pre?
1929?
1929.
1929.
Under other names, but yeah. 1929.
Why look at the history of Mexico through great men?
First of all, like in the case of China, I guess, or of the Middle East, not to look through history or to history to understand the present is something which is impossible. Mexico is such an ancient country in so many ways that you have to look back in order to really understand what's happening now. Now, as to your question, there has been always an immense concentration of power in the leading men in Mexico. First, during the Aztec times, in the Tlatoani, the Aztec emperor, which was a demigod, and so he was treated. Then, during the 3 centuries of Spanish colonial rule, there were 63 viceroys with almost absolute power. Then, 19th century, we had the dominion of the caudillos, total power. And then the 20th century, the revolution, the caudillos of the Mexican Revolution, and then the all-powerful Mexican presidents. We have had I would say 4, 5, 6 centuries of the rule of single, all-powerful men.
Do you think that this most recent election, July 6th, I think it was,
yes,
suggests the beginning of the end of that 6 centuries?
Exactly, exactly. That is the historical significance, I think, of what has happened. We have only had in Mexican history 11 years of democratic experiments. One in the mid-19th century, during the time of Benito Juárez, then 15 months at the beginning of 19th century, and this era that has begun just a few days ago. 11 years in around 175 years of independent life is a small, it points out to small experience in democracy. But I think this time it's for good.
What happened on July 6th that has such ramifications, including the election of Cardenas as mayor of Mexico City?
Many things. First of all, to have clean, fair elections. That hasn't happened in Mexico during all the era of the PRI, because we had simulated a disguised democracy. We had elections every 6 years.
But
every
PRI
3
always
years.
won.
Always won. And through manipulation, all sorts of techniques, great technology, we must admit.
Yeah.
But this has changed in July elections first. Then we have, for the first time in this century, from 1911 to this time, the Congress will belong mainly to the opposition. That makes an enormous difference because during all these years, all these decades, the Congress was really an appendix of the president. The president had those initiatives. The Congress simply accepted them, and in 99% of the cases.
How will this change Mexico? What will Mexico look like 10 years from now?
First of all, it is a matter of self-assurance, of normality, of Mexicans looking to ourselves with hope and with pride. There was something abnormal, awkward in the idea and in the truth of being a country that was not democratic. And being so after 1989 made us feel ashamed in many ways. Mexico will gain, and is gaining already. You feel it in the streets, with taxi drivers, with people, enthusiasm, hope, that this is going to begin a new era where the Constitution is going to be the real rule of the country, a rule of law, and not only formally, but in real terms.
So there's genuine excitement in a sense that the country's turned a corner, leading to more democratic participation.
Perhaps the main word is hope, because you see, a few years ago, Mexico was on the news, but for which reasons? Drugs, corruption, political assassinations, economic crisis, eruption of volcanoes, earthquakes. Where were the good news for the world and for ourselves? Now we have one real good news that we have done by ourselves, gained by ourselves, which is to believe in the vote.
How much of an embarrassment is it when you find in your own country the corruption at the level it was with respect to drugs, where a principal billionaire drug trafficker who recently died had on his payroll the man in charge of overseeing the country's drug policy?
Let me tell you, of course it's an embarrassment. But the good signs, and a great embarrassment, but a good sign is this. Corruption is something that is within, that even has roots in colonial times. That's why in the book I tried always to trace the roots of things, to see the way history gravitates and waits upon Mexico's present and its attitude to the future. But, and you had corruption during colonial times in this way. The viceroys were...
So did almost every other government in the world.
But let me tell you, it was well seen as a normal thing for an official to get rich and do business. That was well seen.
In other words, people knew it was happening and expected it to happen, that a president would leave office a rich man.
Yes, and he was immune and no one could touch him during his term and after. Suddenly, we have these reflectors of the international press and a true free press in Mexico. That happened more or less during the 80s. Then people began to realize how strange this thing was and they had clear conscience of the awkward nature of this practice, and they wanted to look for clear responsibilities and accountability of the president. This has happened for the last, only for the last years, and I think this is here to stay.
What's your opinion of the guilt of Salinas, former president?
I can tell you, I have this idea. Salinas was a true, an important reformer in the economic side, but he was working in a tremendous contradiction, a moral contradiction, a political and a moral contradiction, because he was reforming the economy, let's say his perestroika, but not only without touching the political side, but resorting to the most archaic and corrupt methods in the political side.
So corrupt politics to stimulate appropriate economic reform.
Yes, well, that was a recipe of disaster. And let me tell you exactly where it failed. There was the first commandment of Mexican political system, the system that is now in its way to disappear from the face of the earth, we hope, was that the president couldn't be re-elected after 6 years. The no re-election precept is all important in Mexico. He can be all-powerful, but only for 6 years.
Right.
Okay. Salinas really tried to re-elect himself, and then when he found out that he couldn't, he tried to do it through a proxy. Luis Donaldo Colosio, the man that was slain, was his proxy. He was meant to be the man who took charge, but behind him, as the real boss, would stay Salinas, to come back in the year 2000.
For a second 2 year term.
For a second 6 years, and then to become, that's why the title of that chapter is The Man Who Would Be King. Yeah. He really wanted to become the real king. Well, this is what the people in Mexico and the revolutionary family, that is how we call the politician, couldn't accept. And perhaps the crime was orchestrated within that political clan that understood that they had to stop those ambitions of Salinas.
And his brother was doing criminal things, I assume, at the time.
And accumulating all that fortune, because they would need all the money in the world for their purposes.
For the political,
it was really,
for the political ambition.
You see the tremendous contradiction of being one of the great reformers, NAFTA, privatization, everything. The world, he was in all the magazines and newspapers in the world, and at the same time hiding all these archaic, corrupt political methods.
The deal.
He is, when you saw him at the beginning, you would say, this is a shy man, a moderate man, a technocrat. He has been doing quite well. First of all, he is a man that understands freedom and has understand that he's of course a believer in open markets, and we have had quite a good performance in Mexican economy during these years. But at the same time, he does understand the need of democracy. And he has done many things, but I will mention one. Elections were organized and obviously manipulated by the government and the PRI. In this government, Cedillo has propitiated the creation of an independent organ to supervise elections.
Are you optimistic about Mexico's future?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that we have really opened, because now we have citizens. The difference, the two experiments that I told you about at the beginning, 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, ended up in military takeovers and terrible bloodshed of the revolution. 1 million people died in those years. This time it won't happen, I'm sure, because now we have people, citizens who are aware of their rights. We have freedom of press, we have the media.
This book is called Biography of Power, A History of Modern Mexico, 1810, when the revolution succeeded, to 1996. Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.